Hello and welcome back to this series of talks about workplace loneliness. And in this podcast, we're going to look at the causes of workplace loneliness. I'm Nina Kelly. I am joined by Peter Taylor, who is president of the Chamber of Commerce, and Michael Holbrow, MD of Inspired Leadership Solutions. And we're going to keep talking about these important subjects of loneliness in the workplace. So a reminder from our last podcast is that the definition of loneliness, according to the World Health Organization, it's not about being alone. It's about that sense of loneliness that we feel when the pain we feel when our social connections do not meet our needs starts to impact us and also impacts our mental health. Now, a better work-life balance is one positive to come out of the pandemic, but loneliness and making meaningful connections in an increasingly disconnected work environment has become a real issue. Now, one of the causes of workplace loneliness is the rise in home working, because only 44% of home workers say they feel close to their colleagues, and that's compared to 84% of on-site workers. In other words, 56% of home workers do not feel close to their colleagues, compared to only 16% of on-site workers. Now, these findings were part of a report entitled Loneliness at Work, which was published in January 2023. It was authored by the British Red Cross and the Campaign to End Loneliness for the All-Party Parliamentary Group, which was about tackling loneliness and connected communities. So it really was a very high commissioned and very in-depth research that was carried out. Now, Peter, your law firm, Paris Smith, has addressed the issues around hybrid working and well-being issues post-pandemic. What has made you and Paris Smith take these issues so seriously?
Well, thank you, Nina. I think it actually dates back prior to the pandemic and really goes to the core of our sense of purpose as a business, why we do what we do, not simply how we go about what we do or what we do, it's why we do it. And that is to enable our clients, our staff and our communities to thrive. And in terms of our staff, I take our responsibility as leadership team really importantly, and that is to create an environment in which everybody can thrive, everybody can be at their full potential. People come motivated to do a good job of work. Why would you go motivated to do a bad job of work? It wouldn't make sense to me. So our role is to create that environment in which everybody feels inspired to reach their full potential. And in creating that environment, you've got to enable people to be authentic, put their hand up when they need help, in whatever way they may feel that they need help, and then working together as a team for that shared sense of purpose. And that has come to the fore to a greater extent, during the pandemic, when for the first time in our lives as a regional law firm of 200 plus years, we had 260 remote offices. Wow. And managing that number of remote offices, some of those were in bedsits, some of those were in detached houses, just scattered across the south of England. Yeah. It was a task. And since then, we have seen hybrid working right across the economy in a whole host of sectors, and the legal sector is not immune to that. And continuing to be true to that sense of purpose about wanting people to feel inspired and having the environment, whether that's in the office environment or whether that's working from home, has caused us to want to address this key issue of not only well-being, but also addressing loneliness and in creating that sense of togetherness for that shared sense of purpose. And that works right the way through the organisation, from whatever role you've got within the organisation, whether you may feel it's in general office or a mundane role. None of them are mundane roles in my book, because we're all key cogs to making that purpose ensuring it was delivered.
Yeah. So clearly, you very strong value systems that really caused you to take the issue so seriously, and it's so important. More research. The anecdotal insights are fabulous, but just so people realise this is actually based on real hard facts. So research shows that where an employee perceives relational deficiencies in the workplace, it can show itself as social withdrawal, appearing less approachable to their colleagues. People can experience higher rates of burnout, depression, anxiety, lower overall life satisfaction, less work engagement and productivity, plus greater absenteeism. That's a whole list of things. And then this makes us feel fundamentally disconnected from our colleagues, and we can feel that our contributions are not valued. This then leads to further loss of well-being, unsurprisingly, withdrawal from people and social situations, further loss of self-confidence and self-esteem, increased sensitivity to rejection, and a range of mental and physical health issues, and that includes an impaired immune system. Then, as people's ability to feel engaged and thriving in their work diminishes, it can lead to stress, burnout, and a sense of alienation, and ultimately to disengagement and minimal productivity. Now, Michael, that's a whole host of things caused by loneliness. What's been your observations in your work with managers and directors of companies with people presenting with these symptoms, particularly post-pandemic?
Wow, as you say, there's a lot there going on, and there's that you can just listen to that list and feel this spiral taking on people taking on all these different situations. I'm going to focus in, as you say, post-pandemic, what I'm hearing, and I'm going to give it a label again to make it maybe easier to understand. I'm going to call it the remote leadership syndrome. This is where we are seeing, with the people I'm working with, the challenge around continuing to have to understand how to lead and picking on Peter's word, inspire people remotely. It's still a skill to do in the workplace physically when you're face to face, but actually this remote leadership syndrome is real for directors and managers, because some of the larger companies are still holding back on expense for traveling for them to go and meet their remote teams. And of course the hybrid working environment where people want to have that balance and have that ability to come and go in the workplace. Yeah. But we're also seeing an increase in companies taking on staff and get the best from the marketplace, not just the best, we're here in Southampton, just in this community, but we want the best people available in the market, which means we may have to accept they're going to be remote working and they're never going to come in, or very rarely come into the office. So these environments are being created, and our leaders are struggling to know how to make the connections with their individuals, their employees, their teams, over technology, telephone, and traditionally, Zoom, and all the different methods of communication. And what they find is that they're not allowing that enough extra time within the time allocations they give to people, and they find their diaries get filled up a lot quicker. And it's back to back, and there's no moment where they can have just going from one office to another or walking through the office. They don't exist in their calendars. So we spend a lot of time with them, helping them to create this time flexibility and allowing them to finish meetings and conversations earlier and have some general chats and conversations. Peter used the water cooler moments, and build them into the remote management and leadership of the teams. So that's what we're hearing, that's what we're doing with people, and that's very much what they're telling us they want the biggest help from.
Yeah, so the landscape has changed. I'm hearing from both of you, the landscape has changed a lot post-pandemic, and people really need to kind of totally change their way of thinking and their way of working to deal with it. So, as we touched on in our last podcast, those most at risk of loneliness are primarily, maybe surprisingly, 18 to 24-year-olds, with 39% experiencing loneliness at work. And then the next at-risk group are senior managers, with 32% of senior managers saying they are often or always lonely. And likely to feel that their colleagues are like strangers. So let's look first at young people who are twice as likely to feel lonely than other workers. But 2/3 of young people say that loneliness has affected their mental health. And worryingly, only 34% feel confident in letting their colleagues know that they feel lonely. So despite the fact that so much stigma around mental health has been lifted, the stigma of mental health associated with loneliness clearly hasn't, especially amongst young people. Work at the University of Oxford is showing that 35% of young people are reporting high levels of loneliness and feeling lonelier and more isolated even than their parents. And studies are showing that well over 2/3 of young adult workers under 25 have said, there's this connection between loneliness and their mental health. Peter, what connections do you have with young people, either personally or professionally, and are you surprised about the prevalence of loneliness amongst young people?
So I enjoy meeting people at all stages in their careers, and whether they be experienced or whether they be starting out their journey, and in particular, in many ways, helping those who are in the early stages of their journey is really rewarding. I'm not surprised that there is a prevalence of loneliness amongst young people, particularly when one looks at the pandemic and the events of March 2020 and how that impacted even on the more experienced of us, but particularly those who were in their earlier years, whether they were studying, whether they were just starting out in their careers. And I can remember the importance of social interaction during studies and during those early years. And even now, being able to bounce ideas off people is a great way of learning. And if you are confined, as we were in those times, to just almost trying to work it out yourself, unless you've got a very supportive employer and employment culture, it was going to be tough. And the knock-on effect of that is continuing to be felt now. I'm a firm believer that everyone in life has the need for a rock, and that may come in a number of forms. Your workplace may be your rock. Sometimes it is another person in your life. It may be your parents. It may be a particularly strong family friend. It may be a different environment. But workplace can, for a number of people, be their rock.
Yeah.
And if that is under threat and they're feeling disconnected from that, then they're going to feel that sense of loneliness and loss and isolation. And we need to be able to address that. And key leaders, as Michael has touched on, really being able to reach out, spend time talking to everybody within the business. And I think for me there are three key questions that one should ask on a regular basis. When I say regular, a weekly basis. What did you work on last week? And what did you achieve? What are you working on this week? And how can I help you? And I think if everybody followed that simple mantra, actually we would start to address some of those issues around loneliness for younger people.
I love those three questions, Peter. Could you just repeat them for my benefit, but maybe there's others who want to write them down?
So the three questions are, what did you work on and achieve last week? What are you working on this week? And how can I help you?
Fabulous. Especially that last one, how can I help you, rather than it being like an examination.
Yeah.
It's a very supportive approach. Brilliant. Well, Michael, why do you think it is that young people are lacking in confidence in letting colleagues know about their issues with loneliness?
It's very relevant, Nina. Actually, we've just been, we just run a number of workshops, and we opened up the participants to future leaders, the younger generation coming through, and a lot of 18 to 24-year-olds had joined our leadership programs. And what we were hearing from them was some amazing vulnerability in the classroom with strangers, people they hadn't met. Yet they were open enough to say they would never share that with colleagues or managers back in the workplace for fear of judgment. And that's what they said. And we unpacked a lot of that and started to understand what that really, really looked like for them. And it was really coming back to that, wanting to present themselves in a certain way and not just be judged, but they were worried about the effect it was going to have in terms of their relationships with their colleagues. I guess that is a form of judgment, but that's really what we saw as a real strong message coming from them. We can't open up to people. We don't feel comfortable in the workplace to open up as much as you're asking us to. Yet in amongst a group of strangers, they showed huge amounts of vulnerability. And of course, they were then learning to go and find and understand how they could try and do that with more. But that comes down to, we've said it all, Peter says it so well, the leaders in the business inspiring and having those questions and getting people just be talking and opening up. That's what we're seeing and what we're working with this younger group.
Yeah, and so it's all about creating that safe place where there is no judgment, that no matter what answer people give us, as Peter said, our next question as leaders is how can I help you, rather than why you're having these problems. So, yeah, excellent. So, having spoken to young people on our courses affected by loneliness, they also say that the low levels of socialisation during the pandemic have contributed to the issue, along with the rise of things like gaming, social media, and all that involves, other online methods of interaction. They can all be so transient, and they're not always conducive to deep, meaningful relationships. So, it's hard for young people, because not only are they experiencing greater levels of loneliness, which is affecting their mental health, they're also finding it harder to talk about it, and finding it much harder to talk about than their adult colleagues. So I think in our next podcast we're going to look at the issues around senior managers in the workplace and the causes of workplace loneliness there. But thank you very much for joining with us in this podcast. Especially thank you to Peter Taylor, President of the Chamber of Commerce and Senior Partner at Paris Smith Law Firm, and Michael Holbrow, Managing Director of Inspired Solutions based in Surrey. Thank you both, and please do keep listening to us as we discuss these really important issues.